The courtroom was quiet except for the rustle of papers and the faint tapping of a gavel on wood. Tasha sat at the defendant's table, her hands folded neatly in front of her. She wasn't nervous, though she had every right to be. The judge, Edward Harris, was a man of precision and strict adherence to the letter of the law. Tasha had heard the stories about his unyielding rulings and how he rarely showed leniency. But today, it wasn't just a matter of taxes. Today, the fine would be more than just a number on a paper. Judge Harris glanced over his reading glasses, focusing on Tasha with a sharp look. "Ms. Brown, the evidence is clear. You failed to submit the proper documentation for your tax filings last year. As a result, I am levying a fine of $2,500. You are expected to pay this amount within the next 30 days. Tasha felt the weight of his words. It wasn't the fine that stung. It was the system that had failed her and countless others. A fine like this, imposed without understanding, felt like a slap in the face. Her efforts to make tax filing easier for people like herself, who had fallen through the cracks of the outdated system, seemed far from being recognized. She stood up slowly, meeting the judge's gaze with unwavering confidence. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady but firm, "I understand your decision, but this fine isn't addressing the real issue. The tax system is complicated, outdated, and fundamentally flawed. This is about more than just my mistake. It's about a system that traps people like me in a never-ending cycle of confusion." Judge Harris' brow furrowed. "Ms. Brown, I'm sure your point is valid in some other context, but we are here to address this specific case. I suggest you focus on resolving your outstanding balance before you make accusations about the system." Tasha could feel the tension rising. This wasn't just a court case to her. It was an opportunity to point out the very issue she had been fighting for years, the need for reform. But she knew the judge wasn't the enemy. He was just a part of the much larger bureaucratic machine. Still, she couldn't let it slide. Not today. "I am working on a solution, Your Honor," she said, her voice quieter now, but still strong. "I'm creating a system to make this process easier for people who are facing the same issues I am. A system that won't penalize us for mistakes born out of complexity. And I promise, if I can make it work, people like me won't ever have to sit here again." The judge looked at her for a moment, clearly taken aback. Tasha could see the skepticism in his eyes. He hadn't heard anything like this before, but there was also a glimmer of something else. Perhaps curiosity, or a hint of respect. Judge Harris didn't respond immediately. Instead, he motioned for the next case to be called, leaving Tasha with her thoughts as the courtroom shifted gears. As she left the room, Tasha's mind raced. This fine might have been a setback, but she wasn't backing down. The fight for reform had just begun. As Tasha walked out of the courthouse, the weight of the fine still lingered, but her determination was stronger than ever. Her mind raced with ideas, strategies, and possibilities, all centered around one goal: reforming the federal tax system. She had known for years that the system was broken, but this courtroom experience had made it all too clear. People like her, small business owners, freelancers, and everyday citizens, were caught in a web of complexity that left them vulnerable to mistakes and penalties. And it was a system that, for the most part, didn't care about their struggles. Tasha's story began years before this courtroom encounter. She wasn't always the driven reformer she was today. Growing up in a working-class neighborhood, Tasha had watched her mother, a small business owner, grapple with the intricacies of tax filing every year. The stress, the confusion, the constant fear of making a mistake, it all left a mark on Tasha. Her mother had often spoken about the frustration of not being able to navigate the system properly, especially without an accountant. And for many people like her, paying for professional help wasn't an option. As Tasha got older, she earned a degree in accounting and finance, hoping that her skills would give her an edge in understanding the tax system that had caused so much trouble for her family. But even with all her knowledge, she quickly realized that understanding taxes wasn't enough. The system itself was the problem. It was convoluted, outdated, and designed in a way that only someone with years of experience could fully comprehend. It was then that Tasha decided to take matters into her own hands. Armed with her expertise and a desire to help people like her mother, she set out to create a solution. She started working with a small team of developers, tax experts, and fellow entrepreneurs to build a software platform that would make the tax filing process more intuitive, transparent, and accessible. The software wasn't just a dream. It was already taking shape. The platform used artificial intelligence to guide users through the filing process, offering explanations in plain language and automating steps that usually caused confusion. No longer would people need to worry about missing forms or making costly errors. The system would simplify the entire process, and most importantly, it would be accessible to everyone, regardless of their background or tax knowledge. But as her project progressed, Tasha faced more than just technical challenges. She also had to contend with resistance from the very system she was trying to change. Bureaucratic inertia, skepticism from government officials, and a lack of funding were constant hurdles. Yet, she pressed on, knowing that the solution she was building could help millions of people. As she sat in her car, reflecting on the day's events, Tasha's resolve only grew. The fine might have been a setback, but it also highlighted just how desperately the tax system needed to change. She wasn't going to let it stop her. She had a mission, and no amount of bureaucracy would stand in her way. Tasha sat in the parking lot, her fingers drumming restlessly on the steering wheel as the weight of the judge's words replayed in her mind. The fine wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a reminder of everything wrong with the system. She had worked tirelessly to develop a solution that could simplify tax filing. Yet here she was, slapped with a penalty for a system she was actively trying to fix. It stung, but in a strange way, it also fueled her. The drive back to her small office space felt longer than usual. Every streetlight seemed to blink in rhythm with her racing thoughts. The encounter with Judge Harris had been a jarring reminder of the indifference many people faced when it came to the complexities of the tax code. The fine was a consequence of something much larger, something she had spent years trying to change. Tasha knew her initiative wasn't just about fixing a broken system. It was about giving power back to people who had been ignored for far too long. That night, Tasha sat down with her team. The space around her was cluttered with papers, tax documents, and laptops displaying code. Her colleagues had been putting in long hours, working on the platform's user interface, testing features, and refining algorithms. But Tasha couldn't focus on the work at hand just yet. She had to talk. "We can't let this stop us," she said, her voice steady but intense. "This fine. It's just another reminder of how deeply flawed this system is. It's a system designed to make people fail, and we can't be part of that. We need to keep going." Her team exchanged looks, the exhaustion of late nights weighing on their faces, but there was no hesitation in their response. They all knew what was at stake. Tasha's vision was clear, a tax system that wasn't an obstacle but a resource, something that empowered people rather than intimidating them. "We're not just fixing tax filings," she continued. "We're giving people back their time, their peace of mind, and their trust in the system. We're making something that works for them, not against them." The room was filled with a renewed energy, as if Tasha's words had reignited their belief in the project. They had come this far. They weren't about to let a fine derail their progress. Tasha glanced around the room, at the faces of people who, like her, had been frustrated by the tax system for years. It wasn't just about technology or efficiency. It was about real people whose lives were impacted by the system's flaws. The next morning, Tasha received an email from a potential investor. It was an encouraging sign that her efforts weren't going unnoticed. But as she read the message, a thought crossed her mind. This fine, this setback, it could be the spark she needed to make her voice heard. Tasha had always been an advocate for change, but now, the stakes felt higher than ever. She was no longer just fighting for herself. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been buried under paperwork or penalized for a system that made no sense. With renewed determination, she pressed forward. The battle was just beginning, and Tasha wasn't backing down. In the weeks following her court appearance, Tasha threw herself deeper into her work. The fine, once a source of frustration, had ignited a new fire within her. Every setback, every moment of resistance, only strengthened her resolve to make her tax filing platform a success. She wasn't just trying to create software, she was building a movement. Tasha envisioned a world where tax filing was as simple as filling out a form, where every taxpayer could confidently navigate the system without fear of penalties or confusion. Her team worked around the clock, pushing through long hours of coding, troubleshooting, and refining the platform. Tasha's vision was the driving force behind it all. She saw the platform not as a tool, but as a bridge between the people and a broken system that had long been inaccessible to those who needed it most. It was designed to break down the walls that had kept many taxpayers from understanding their obligations and penalties. The platform's primary feature was its ease of use. Unlike traditional software that relied on jargon-filled instructions, Tasha's system offered a straightforward, step-by-step guide. It broke down the tax filing process into simple tasks, explaining each step in everyday language. Users could easily upload their documents, track deductions, and receive real-time feedback about their filings. Most importantly, it highlighted errors before they could lead to penalties, empowering people to correct mistakes before they became costly. But even with all the progress, the road ahead was anything but smooth. Tasha faced skepticism from government officials who viewed her project as too ambitious. They questioned whether such a platform could truly streamline a system as complex as tax filings. The entrenched bureaucracy wasn't ready to embrace change, and many of the bigger players in the tech world dismissed her idea as just another app that wouldn't make a dent in the larger system. Some even tried to launch their own versions of simplified tax tools, but they often lacked the nuance and empathy Tasha's platform provided. Despite the challenges, Tasha kept pushing forward. She met with lawmakers, pitching her platform as a tool that could save the government time and resources by reducing the number of tax errors and audits. She showed them case studies from early users of the platform who had saved both money and time by using the system. Each success story fueled her drive, proving that change was not only possible but necessary. Late one night, as Tasha reviewed some feedback from beta users, she received a message from a former colleague in the tech industry. "Tasha," it read, "I've been following your progress. What you're doing could change the game. Let's talk." For the first time in weeks, Tasha smiled. It was a sign that her work was getting noticed. The pieces were falling into place. The fight was far from over, but now it felt like she had allies in unexpected places. As the platform began gaining traction, Tasha realized that her vision was no longer just a personal mission. It was a growing movement, one that could, in time, reshape the entire tax landscape. Judge Edward Harris sat in his chambers, a cup of coffee cooling on his desk as he skimmed through the case file. The name Tasha Brown lingered in his thoughts, though not for the reasons he expected. When he had sentenced her to the fine for her tax filing error, he had seen it as a straightforward case, another person making a mistake in a complicated system. But after their brief exchange in the courtroom, something had stayed with him. There had been a fire in her eyes, a sense of conviction that had unsettled him in a way he couldn't quite put his finger on. The more he thought about it, the more he realized he might have been too quick to judge. He had seen hundreds of similar cases, but Tasha's words had struck a chord. "This is about a system that traps people like me," she had said, and he couldn't help but wonder if she was right. After all, the tax code had always seemed convoluted to him, a jungle of rules and exceptions that often left even seasoned professionals scratching their heads. Curiosity gnawed at him, so Judge Harris decided to do something he rarely did. He took the time to learn more. He searched online for Tasha Brown, and what he found left him intrigued. Her name wasn't just associated with one small filing mistake. She was leading a campaign to reform the entire tax system, working on a software platform designed to make tax filing simpler and more transparent. The more he read about her work, the more he realized that Tasha wasn't just another person who misunderstood the tax code. She was someone trying to fix it. Over the next few days, Judge Harris spent hours learning about Tasha's platform. He saw the testimonials of people who had used it, small business owners, freelancers, and everyday citizens who had struggled with the traditional tax system. They spoke of how the software had helped them avoid errors, save time, and even reduce their tax burdens. These were not just technical improvements. They were real, tangible benefits to the people who needed them most. But even as his respect for Tasha grew, Harris couldn't shake the feeling that he had acted too hastily in his court ruling. He had been quick to impose the fine, believing that the law was black and white, without fully considering the context of the person standing before him. Tasha wasn't just another taxpayer. She was a woman who had identified a problem in the system and was working tirelessly to solve it. Judge Harris sat back in his chair, a wave of realization washing over him. Perhaps it wasn't just Tasha who needed to change the system. Maybe he, too, needed to reconsider his role within it. Determined to make things right, Harris drafted a letter to Tasha. It was a small gesture, but he hoped it might be the first step toward understanding the true scope of her mission, and maybe even offering her the support she deserved. Tasha's days were growing more hectic, filled with long hours working on her platform and meetings with potential investors. Despite her success in developing the software, she felt the pressure mounting. The more progress she made, the more resistance she encountered. Government agencies, tax professionals, and even large corporations seemed intent on maintaining the status quo. She was determined, but the road ahead still felt uncertain. Yet in the midst of all the chaos, something unexpected happened. She received a letter from Judge Edward Harris. The envelope was plain, the handwriting on the front formal and sharp. At first, Tasha was confused. Why would the judge, who had fined her for a tax mistake months ago, be reaching out to her now? The memory of their brief exchange in court came flooding back, and she couldn't help but feel a wave of curiosity. Had he reconsidered his decision? Or was this just another legal formality? Tasha tore open the envelope, her eyes scanning the letter quickly. It was short but direct. Dear Ms. Brown, I hope this letter finds you well. After our brief exchange in court, I took the time to learn more about the work you're doing with your tax platform. I must admit, I was initially focused solely on the legal aspects of your case. However, upon further reflection, I believe I may have missed the bigger picture. The system you're trying to improve is indeed complex, and as you've pointed out, can often work against those it was meant to serve. I've come to realize that your efforts to simplify and reform the process have the potential to make a significant difference for many individuals and businesses who have long been underserved. While my role as a judge requires me to remain impartial, I felt it was important to acknowledge the significance of your work. I sincerely hope your initiative continues to grow, and that your vision for a more transparent and accessible tax system becomes a reality. I wish you the best in your endeavors, and I hope we can find ways to collaborate in the future. Warm regards, Edward Harris. Tasha read the letter again, disbelief and gratitude washing over her in equal measure. For a moment, she sat in stunned silence, absorbing the weight of the judge's words. She had never expected this kind of recognition, especially not from someone who had once been the embodiment of the very system she was fighting to change. The letter wasn't just an apology or acknowledgement. It was an invitation. Judge Harris was offering her something she hadn't anticipated, a bridge between her work and the very institution she had challenged. Her heart raced. This could be the turning point she had been waiting for. With renewed confidence, Tasha set the letter aside and began drafting a response. She knew she wasn't alone in this fight anymore. Something bigger was beginning to take shape, an alliance that could transform not just her platform, but the tax system itself. Tasha paced around her small office, her mind racing. She had reread Judge Harris's letter multiple times, the words sinking in deeper with each pass. It wasn't just a simple acknowledgement of her work. It was a validation of everything she had fought for over the past few years. The very judge who had fined her was now offering his support. Tasha couldn't help but smile. She had always known that change was possible, but this felt like proof that the system could, in some ways, evolve. She sat down at her desk and began drafting a response. The letter had been a significant step in the right direction, but she knew that this was only the beginning. She had to act quickly to build on this momentum. Tasha's vision had always been bigger than just software. She wanted to create a movement, and now she had an unexpected ally in a place she never imagined. Dear Judge Harris, thank you for your thoughtful letter. I must admit, I never expected to receive such recognition from the very system I've been working to reform. Your words mean more than I can express. I believe your willingness to engage in this conversation is an important step in opening the door to real change. I would love the opportunity to meet and discuss how we might work together to make the tax system more accessible, transparent, and fair for everyone. Your perspective and experience as a judge could be invaluable in shaping the future of this initiative, and I'm confident that together we can make a real impact. Please let me know a convenient time for you to meet. Warmly, Tasha Brown. She hit send and leaned back in her chair, letting out a deep breath. It was one thing to get a letter of support, but now it was time to turn that support into action. Tasha knew that if Judge Harris was willing to help, she could begin bridging the gap between her platform and the very institutions that had once seemed insurmountable. The partnership wasn't just about reforming tax filing. It was about reforming trust in the system itself. A few days later, she received a response from the judge, and the two scheduled a meeting at his office. Tasha arrived early, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. She had spent so much time advocating for reform, but now she was about to sit across from the very man who had once been an obstacle. When she entered the room, Judge Harris stood up to greet her with a firm handshake. His demeanor was professional but warm, a clear sign that he was serious about collaborating. The conversation started with small talk, but soon they were deep in discussion about the flaws in the tax system. Everything from the confusing forms to the penalties that disproportionately affected low-income families and small business owners. The more they spoke, the more Tasha realized how much they shared in common. Despite their different roles, they both understood the urgency of the situation. By the end of the meeting, they had agreed on several concrete steps. Judge Harris would lend his influence to help her platform gain more credibility with lawmakers, and Tasha would provide feedback to help streamline the tax code from a practical, user-centered perspective. As Tasha left the meeting, she felt a sense of optimism she hadn't experienced in years. Her fight for tax reform had just gained a powerful ally, and it was only the beginning. The weeks following her meeting with Judge Harris were a whirlwind of activity. The momentum had shifted in Tasha's favor. With the judge's backing, doors that had previously been closed to her started to open. She found herself meeting with lawmakers, policy advisors, and tax reform experts who were suddenly interested in her platform and vision for change. Tasha's partnership with Judge Harris became a pivotal turning point. His influence lent her credibility, and together they began to push for legislative support for tax reform. The judge, using his position, helped Tasha navigate the complex political landscape. He spoke at hearings and introduced her platform to government officials who had never before considered an alternative to the status quo. The more they worked together, the more they discovered just how outdated and rigid the tax system had become. Tasha's platform was a powerful tool to address these issues, but she knew that real change couldn't be achieved through technology alone. It had to be backed by policy change. With Judge Harris's guidance, Tasha began drafting proposals that would modernize tax filing requirements, simplify forms, and reduce penalties for honest mistakes. It wasn't an easy road. The pushback from certain sectors, particularly large financial institutions and entrenched bureaucrats, was fierce. They had a vested interest in maintaining the complexity of the system as it worked to their advantage. But Tasha and Judge Harris didn't back down. They knew that change wouldn't happen overnight, but they were committed to making it a reality. Through their work, more small businesses and everyday people began to see tangible benefits. The feedback from users of Tasha's platform was overwhelmingly positive. People were saving time, avoiding penalties, and feeling empowered to take control of their financial lives. One by one, Tasha began receiving messages from people whose lives had been transformed by the simplicity and transparency her system provided. And then, a breakthrough came. After months of meetings, drafting proposals, and working tirelessly behind the scenes, Tasha received an invitation to speak at a congressional hearing on tax reform. It was an opportunity she had dreamed of, a chance to directly influence the decision-makers who could enact real, lasting change. On the day of the hearing, Tasha sat in the front row, nerves pulsing through her but determination steady in her heart. When her name was called, she stood up, walked to the podium, and faced the room full of lawmakers and policy experts. She spoke not just about her platform, but about the millions of people whose lives had been made harder by a system they couldn't navigate. She spoke with passion, conviction, and hope, knowing that the journey she had started in a courtroom was now reaching a much larger stage. When she finished, the room fell silent for a moment, and then a round of applause. It was a powerful moment, one that told her everything she needed to know. The change was no longer just a dream. It was beginning to happen. Tasha left the hearing that day feeling a sense of accomplishment. The road ahead was still long, but with allies like Judge Harris and the support of those who believed in her cause, she knew one thing for sure: the system was about to change.